If yesterday Malyuk was having fun and torching the occupiers, today it's Budanov's turn. In just one night, Ukrainian special services and defense forces carried out a whole series of top-level operations that are literally burning through the logistics, aviation, and general staff of the Russian army. In the center of Moscow, one of the key planners of the war against Ukraine, a Russian army general, was taken out. They destroyed an airbase with aircraft, an oil terminal, ammunition depots, and ships. Friends, this night was just insane. Subscribe to this YouTube channel, and in just a second, I'll tell you everything. So let's not waste any time and get started right away. And what are we going to start with? We're going to start with the fact that this morning in Moscow didn't begin with the chimes of the Kremlin clock. It began with a powerful explosion. On Yazeneva Street, an explosive device went off right under the bottom of a Kia Sorento. Behind the wheel, friends, was not just some official, but a person responsible for planning military operations of the Russian Federation. The head of the Operational Training Directorate of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation, Lieutenant General Fanil Sarvarov. What happens next? And then what happens is that the investigative committee, the Russian Federation, immediately, of course, opens a case. And naturally, one of the versions they name is the involvement of whom? Well, obviously, the Ukrainian Special Services. Ukraine officially does not comment on anything, which is an absolutely correct approach, a clear and thoroughly professional position. Russian mass media immediately start reporting, that is, about the fact that the 56-year-old man was pulled out of the car, managed to be hospitalized, but later it becomes known that he, that's right, died from his injuries. Who was it? It was Fanil Sarvarov. Who is he and why is his elimination, friends, actually a strategic blow? In fact, Fanil Sarvarov is not just the desk general. He is a career officer with experience in Chechnya, with experience in Syria. He graduated from a prestigious tank school. He graduated from the Russian General Staff Academy, but most importantly, it's his position. Since 2016, he headed the Operational Training Department of the General Staff. What does this mean in practice? This, friends, is essentially the brain center that prepares the plans for all major military operations, coordinates the actions of different branches of the military, and is responsible for the country's mobilization readiness. It trains commanders and staffs. In other words, just imagine for a second, this is the person whose plans were used when preparing the attack on Ukraine in 2022, as well as for subsequent military actions. For example, during the assaults on Bakhmut, Avdiivka, during the offensives in the Kharkiv region, and so on and so forth. In other words, his command is a factory that mass produces death for Ukrainian cities and villages. His being awarded the rank of Lieutenant General in May 2024 only underscores his importance, his significance in this war. His elimination is not just a blow to a general, friends, it is a blow to the very process of operational planning in the occupier's army. This is a serious loss for the Russian war machine. But friends, that's not all. Let's be honest, because we should remember that Sarvarov is far from the first target of this level. A whole series of high-ranking Russian military officials involved in the war have ceased to be a threat right in their own homes. For example, on December 17, 2024, an explosion near a house on Ryazansky Avenue. At that time, I want to remind everyone, the head of the Russian NBC protection troops, Igor Kirillov, was killed. The Russians arrested several people, accusing them of working for Ukraine, of course. Next, we move into summer, a warm summer, and for Russia, an extremely hot one. A scorching summer, to be precise, on July 24th of that same year, 2024, when an explosion occurred near the blast near a Toyota SUV in Moscow echoed across half of Moscow, half of the Russian capital. The GRU officer survives because he was the target, but he lost his legs. Well, now he's a general without legs, or rather, an officer without legs. For carrying out this act, Yevhen Serebriakov was sentenced to 25 years. Next, we move on to spring, the beautiful spring, April of 2025, a powerful car explosion in Balashika. At that time, the deputy chief of the main operations directorate of the general staff, Yaroslav Moskalik, was killed. The perpetrator, Ignat Kuzin, was sentenced to life imprisonment. And please, don't forget about the missing General Kuzuvliov. Let us at least recall President Zelensky's words about the general who, remember, reported to Putin about the capture of Kupiansk and then somehow mysteriously disappeared. Of course, this is unconfirmed information, but it illustrates the trend well. I already mentioned in previous episodes when I talked about Kupiansk that this general received, well, actually, at that time he wasn't a general yet. He was promoted to general. And later he was also awarded the Hero of the Russian Federation Star. He told Putin that Kupiansk had been captured. Bam, Siersky comes out and says that Kupiansk is 90% under Ukrainian control. Zelensky comes there. We all remember that famous photo of him, right? Or rather, his address near the Stele. And that's it. The general who basically made a fool out of Putin is now being looked for somehow. They still can't find him. What do we see here, friends? We see a clear trend. The war unleashed by the Kremlin is starting to exact its price not only there, on the battlefield in Ukraine, but also in the aggressor's rear. And that's very important. It's a pattern because the generals who plan war crimes cannot feel safe. Their punishment is only a matter of time and the professionalism of our special services. Well, look, do you see what even the Russian media are writing? Sarvarov became the third Russian lieutenant general eliminated in Moscow in a year. Just in 1 year. Good evening. We are from Ukraine. That's what it's called. By the way, a huge heartfelt greeting and thanks to Budanov. Just saying for a moment. But friends, the action this night doesn't end there. While this general was burning out in Moscow, in another region of Russia, near Lipetsk, planes were burning. The main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, under the leadership of Kirilo Budanov, carried out a truly precision operation. It's an incredibly cool one. A representative of the resistance movement on Russian territory managed to infiltrate a strategic military airfield unnoticed. The targets were the newest and extremely expensive Su-30 and Su-27 fighter jets, which, by the way, the Russians are actively using to terrorize our peaceful Ukrainian cities. And after 2 weeks of meticulous preparation and studying patrol schedules, a sabotage operation was carried out. In other words, this was truly a meticulous, I emphasize once again, operation that took more than a day to carry out. Take a look at this footage. Both planes that were parked, by the way, in a protective hangar, were set on fire and put out of commission. And that means put out of commission that they simply won't be able to fly anymore and attack us. The estimated value of the destroyed equipment, just for a moment, is $100 million. This isn't just, friends, a strike against equipment. This is a strike against their reputation. It's a blow, if it even exists there, to the sense of security of the Russian, as they call them, aerospace forces, if that's even possible near Lipetsk. Next, we have a question. Where else could this happen? Is it possible? And I'll tell you, friends, where else this is possible. In the Krasnodar region of the Russian Federation. But, spoiler alert, not only there. Because, I'll be honest, sometimes I get the impression that Malyuk, Madyar, and Budanov are passing the baton to each other. A few days ago, the head of the SBU was having fun in Crimea. I think Belbek is still burning there. Tonight was Budanov's night. Well, and tomorrow we'll make an episode about Madyar, because something will be burning again, either on Russian territory or in the temporarily occupied territories. It seems to me they're even arguing among themselves over who will strike and where. So friends, tonight a whole series of critically important sites were hit simultaneously. The first was the Tamaneftegas oil terminal, a strike on one of the largest oil and gas transshipment complexes. Explosions and fires were recorded at the docks with damage to ships and storage tanks, that is, both vessels and fuel reservoirs were affected. This is a direct hit to the country's energy budget, the war budget, and to the fuel logistics for the Russian army. Plus, don't forget, yes, there were small vessels there, but still. Next, what else? The base point for riverboats in occupied Olenivka. Destruction of watercraft of the 92nd Brigade of the Russian Federation. An ammunition depot near Pokrovsk. This is in the temporarily occupied territory of Donetsk region. Nearby, I emphasize, because Pokrovsk is not yet under Russian control. At least, I hope so. Elimination of ammunition stockpiles directly in the occupied territory. Next, storage sites for preparing strike unmanned aerial vehicles. Jiran, for example, near Donetsk, a strike on the very same weapons that Russia uses to terrorize Ukrainian cities every night. In fact, friends, within a single night, an operation was carried out on all fronts. From sabotage behind enemy lines to artillery and missile strikes on temporarily occupied territories, ships, oil refineries, fuel terminals, and so on. They even banned the general. Because in fact, what we have in the end, my dear friends, first of all, it has been proven that those who plan the war are not untouchable. In other words, they are held accountable. The war planners, they are held accountable. Sarvarov is a clear example of this. Secondly, Ukrainian intelligence is capable of carrying out extremely complex operations deep in enemy territory, causing enormous material losses and undermining the enemy's sense of security. This is extremely important. Thirdly, the defense forces of Ukraine are carrying out systematic, targeted work to destroy the logistics, reserves, and economic base of Russian aggression. From oil pipelines to drone warehouses, the war that was started by Russia is gradual but relentless. It is returning to where it began, where it was launched from. In fact, I would even say it is coming to the courtyards of Moscow, to the generals, to the airfields, to the planes, to the oil terminals. This is the law of history, friends, and this law is beginning to take effect. Our defense is becoming more proactive, smarter, and more unpredictable for the enemy. This is only the beginning. That's what I wanted to tell you, and on that note, I'll end this episode. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel and subscribe to it. Please give a lot of likes to the defense forces, to Budanov, Malyuk, and Madyar, and to those guys and girls who carry out such incredibly complex and extremely important operations for us, destroying the enemy literally every day. Take care of yourselves and see you next time.